Sound of a skylark. It is a mild morning. It's dry as well, which is unusual at the moment. Welcome to this week's Countryside Podcast. Our farmer Chris Skinner from High Ash Farm near Norwich is our host as always, and we're out in one of the fields next to a hedgerow. And Chris, what's this you've got a diagram for?
Yes, well, it's a map, Matthew, and I'm really fortunate because somebody at the Norfolk Landscape Archaeology Department at Gressenhall, by the name of Alice Catamole, has printed me out 2 historic maps of High Ash Farm. And the one in front of us, that I've got on the car bonnet here, is 1760. And let's just turn it round. Well, it is facing the right way because that's north. And if we look behind us, there's a woodland there.
Yes.
And in 1760, it's we're at, I'll just get the right point, we are just here. And there's no wood at all there across there.
Oh.
It's just absent. And so the strange thing is people get very excited about the countryside and tradition, but it has changed so much. If we had a map of the Bronze Age, this was probably all forest, and we've done land clearance, and then it's been forgotten about and farmed and then grown up as woodland and old hedgerows. And it's happened time and time again over the millennia. So you can go back 3,000 years, and a lot of this land was farmed, and it's just had so many changes of use.
So this is 265 odd years ago, and
yes.
And the field shapes, is it something you recognise?
Yes, a little bit. Many of these hedgerow boundaries that defined the actual fields themselves were long gone, really, and some were reinstated just for convenience. And often hedges, when you think they've been planted, they're actually the limit of land reclamation before you come to some feature. So if there was a stream, often you'd leave some of the scrubby sort of wilderness growth, if you like, beside the stream because it wasn't worth going any further. And then it grew up and formed one of our early hedges. Then things started to change, and the next map, which Alice very kindly has printed out for us, is in 1920. And there's a woodland over there behind us, Matthew, and that would be at this point here. And it's not there.
It's a field.
It's a field.
With a hedge,
the whole field.
But no woodland.
And amazingly, on this map, let's scale up.
Right above us.
About 100 feet above us, Matthew.
He resents us, I think.
Yes, I know. We're in his territory. And all the trees on High Ash Farm, apart from the woodland, which is all little dots of trees, all the individual trees are marked out in these hedgerows, and many of those have gone because agricultural practices, right at the beginning of my farming career, it was sort of using boxes and matches to do all your baling. You remember the days of straw burning, and a lot of agricultural chemicals we were using were pretty diabolical, to say the least. Things like DDT, dieldrin, some of the seed dressings, mercuric oxide on all the seed. And so things started to change because we were having such an effect on the environment that there was a big conference in 1969 at Silsoe, and environmentalists and farmers all agreed to meet there to see if there was some sort of marriage that could be made between caring for the environment and for home food production. And I was very much I wasn't part of the conference, but from 1971 the government joined in as well and had a government white paper, 1971, Food from Our Own Resources, and it started to acknowledge the importance of the environment as well. And although in my early farming career I'd been paid to take many hedges out, 20 miles went at High Ash Farm alone, leaving about another 20. And you just hired a bulldozer at the end of the harvest season and drove down the hedges, then pushed them up into big sort of bonfires and set fire to it.
I can tell it's a painful memory.
It was embarrassing to think what I did, because I was really keen to do it, and you got paid to do it as well. So you start to amalgamate fields, and farmers were being pushed the whole time with new varieties of cereals and sugar beet and potatoes. Many came from the Cambridge breeding units, and everything had the prefix of Maris, which meant it was bred in Cambridge. Maris Huntsman wheat, Maris Piper potatoes, all the varieties were better than the previous varieties, so you got encouraged to see. It was an exciting time at the same time. And so that huge change happened, and as a result of that big conference in 1969 at Silsoe, an organisation was formed called FWAG. It's an abbreviation, obviously. It's called Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. And it hadn't solely got the interest of farmers in mind, nor solely the interests of conservationists and environmentalists, but there was a conflict between the two bodies, and I think farmers began to realise that they'd gone a little bit too far, but still being pushed by all the modern agricultural machinery. In about episode 3 or 4 of this podcast series we're doing, we visited a local machinery distributor, and even I was amazed at the size of the tractors and the harvesters. They are colossal, and you can't use them in all these tiny little paddock fields. That little meadow over there was 6 paddocks over in the corner, and that's on the map here as well. Let's see if I can find it for you.
Just remind us when this map was from.
This one is 1920.
Right, 100 years ago.
Yes, it's 100 years almost exactly.
I can see Fox's Grove.
Yes,
on there,
Fox's Grove
which is
there.
where we regularly go on this podcast.
It's a tiny little portion of woodland, and it goes right up to Caister Lane at the moment, and there it is. It's only 10 acres. It's currently 33 acres. The woodland over there behind us is missing. This woodland has only just been planted in 1920 as for pheasant cover, and then it was felled in the Second World War after about 50 odd years.
So it was put in for the guns.
It was put in for the guns and for timber, and it was clear felled and then left completely alone, so it's rejuvenated itself. Little pied wagtail, 2 of them in amongst the horses, just beside us, just down here. Can you see them?
Oh yes, yeah.
Flitting there, and just over it in the other corner of this new field, flock of starlings coming down to feed.
Oh, all going up as one and down as one.
Yes, and then in the field just over there, almost out of sight, a lovely flock of crows, rooks and jackdaws all feeding together on the soil invertebrates.
Look at all the starlings, there's more joining them.
Yes, there is. It's going to be quite a big sort of daytime murmuration. Absolutely lovely. So those big changes that I'm talking about happened, and then this marriage was formed with FWAG between farmers and environmentalists, and FWAG was giving free advice to farmers about restoring some of these huge fields into smaller fields and giving advice on conservation. And High Ash Farm's very much been shaped by FWAG. In 2006 I went into a higher level stewardship scheme here at the farm, and they gave advice as to where to put the right hedges again. 2 skylarks right behind us, and 1 pair fighting with an odd one. There's 3 only 10 yards from us.
They were almost, yes.
It's
a territorial thing.
Absolutely. Another man came into that pair's territory. And
they flew a bit like we'll see in a couple of months' time when the swallows arrive.
Yes, exactly that. They had dive bombing each other. And anyway, so we started to put back the features that many of which had been taken out in the 1960s and 1970s, and the current government target with DEFRA is 45,000 new miles of hedgerow by 2050. And I've brought you here to a particular spot because we're going to be looking at hedgerows this morning, and this is the beginning of a new hedge. It's stretching away. It's
hundreds of little green tubes
each with a cane in there, and
So
at the bottom of them,
There's more plastic than wood at the moment.
well, yes, we call it a tubey, a tubey hedge, and it shows out from quite a distance. But we have rabbits here, we have hares, there are horses nearby, but all these are protected. And in the past, I've put a plastic sheet all the way down, and then planted the hedge whips, we call them, little hawthorn, blackthorn, some dogwood in there, field maple, hazel. There's a whole mix of lovely British native species to sort of replace all the damage that I did all those years ago. And so that's the beginning. You couldn't have a younger hedge than this one. It's only been in a week, and we hope it will be here for 200 or 300 years. But as I said, it's outside my control beyond a few more years and remainder of my farming career. And the countryside has always been changing, and it's getting used to that. Right behind us is the result of negotiating with FWAG. This was a 100-acre field and 40 hectares in new money, if you like, and we copied the hedgerow plants that are all around the farm in the old mature hedges that were left. And this is now getting nicely established. You can still see some of the tubes at the bottom.
So this isn't an ancient hedge, this is one that you've replanted. And how old would this be, this one?
This now is, it was planted in 2006, so what's that, about 18 odd years old.
Yes, it's still got signs of newness about it, hasn't
Yes.
it? And it's grown up tall.
Yes, and we are standing here along this hedge boundary here. And there were trees here, and I bulldozed this bank out, and I know you've screwed your face up, which says it all, sort of looking at me as I'm a heathen. And I didn't feel like that at the time, but there's so much habitat was lost, all the small mammals in the hedgerows, and of course hedgerows, which we haven't really talked about much yet, are hugely important wildlife corridors. And that, when I met FWAG and they started to explain to me the importance of having wildlife corridors, I could just begin to see the error of my ways back then. But as a young man and being paid to do it, every encouragement was there to get the bulldozer in and to take these old features out, and then to have the larger agricultural machine, and that's a reward. You know, a farmer in a spanking new tractor or a large combine, that's quite something compared to just a few mice and voles running around and rabbits. You got help to get rid of the rabbits, and so.
But you've been on a road to Damascus since then.
I certainly have. Certainly for the last 30 odd years, I've done the Norfolk motto, which is called do different, and I've tried to say sorry to the environment by trying to behave. So here we have a 18-year-old hedge. It's now about 8 feet tall. There's blackthorn there, hazel just in front of us, just
see the catkins
with the catkins on, and it's throwing out all sorts of new growth from the bottom. And then the main constituent is this prickly fellow, which is hawthorn. And bearing in mind this is arable land, so we don't actually need livestock fences, which was the original purpose of putting hedges in. The Saxons probably planted a lot of hedges because we have a Anglo-Saxon cemetery only about half a mile from us, and they certainly farmed this land as the way a sort of way that I'm farming it today. Another way they produced food from it. So you can still see the plastic tree guards at the bottom. They're meant to be biodegradable. And if I look down here, there is 33,000 hedging plants went in on this, which is plastic. There it is. It's covered up with leaf mould and all the hedge trimmings that have landed on top, and leaves blown in, and some of the tree guards are still here with the original canes, although they've been in 18 years. Look at that. It's just amazing. So we're going to visit a different part of the farm in a few minutes and see some of the ancient hedges that escaped Skinner's bulldozer all those years ago.
So this is only under 20 years old. The one behind this is about a week old.
A week old, and we're now going to see one that's perhaps 300, 350 years old and see what they look like and what they can provide. So we've got to hop back in the truck and then we'll drive to the other side of the farm, and you can see all over the farm newly planted hedges that went in 2006, 2007. As I said, there's just on 30,000 tree whips went in, and every sort of 30, 40 yards we copied the original planting of the oak trees, which you can see in that original hedge over there, where oak trees were put in every chain. There's
22 yards.
Exactly, and there's eight chains to a furlong, I think, and 8 furlongs to a mile. So 200. A furlong's 220 yards long, and that's exactly the width of this newly planted hedges.
That's a furlong.
This is a furlong, yes, exactly. All these old fields were measured out in furlongs, so they're all sort of 220 yards long.
I always fail in the final furlong.
Yes, they do, yes. It's certainly the ones I've ever betted on. That's why I'm not a gambling man anymore. Right.
No, but you're a hedge fund manager.
Oh, yes, well done.
Really is a mild morning. Not much evidence of sun, but lots of people walking on the farm tracks, and it feels almost spring-like, doesn't it?
It does. I think we're close to 15 degrees centigrade today, so it's positively balmy, especially after any cold weather, when you have that transition from cold to warmth and then back again. Because February never seems to make up its mind. It's sort of, as I said in a previous podcast, February Phildike, black or white, would just mean you can get a lot of rain or snow, and if the wind comes from the north, you certainly get the cold with it. But the sun's actually trying to come through the cloud behind us, and so it does feel really lovely, and all of a sudden the birds start singing, and it suddenly changes really, really quickly. And I noticed that daffodils are out, snowdrops will soon be over. We've seen daisies in flower this morning, and it's all unfolding just as it should do.
Just as your script would demand.
Yes, exactly that.
But we're talking about hedges this morning.
Yes, and so I thought I'd bring you to the most ancient one on the farm that's on that 1760 map from Gressenhall, and it's absolutely amazing. The hedge has almost become a row of trees. It's probably up 20-25 feet. There's a ditch the other side of it, and then there's a ditch at the other side of this track with water streaming through, and also a hedge there. And that hedge probably originally was the extent of land clearance. Trees on the hillside there would have all been cleared to make arable fields, and it's been this constant change from forestry to arable land. And then as there's more and more people out in this world, we're realising the importance of food production, but it's so aggressive now with the modern machinery. Fewer and fewer people working on farms dictates that you have to have huge machinery, you have to work very quickly, very precisely, so it's put a pressure on the environment, and that's where that organisation FWAG, Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, comes in to marry the two interests, if you like, the interest of conservation and the interests of farmers, which is basically food production. Because it's dead easy just to hop in a tractor and keep ploughing and not take regard of the world that we live in. And so these old environmental features, and this lovely bird song just then, I didn't catch who that was singing at us to say thank you, but this old hedgerow, it really needs some attention now, because hedges are only hedges because they're kept trimmed, and years ago this would have been a layered hedge all done by hand and folded over and braided in.
But really, they've become trees, haven't they?
They certainly have, and it doesn't suit the species that grow in hedges. There's hazel there, which is 25 feet tall, probably. Crabapple a bit further down, that can get to 30 feet and be okay. But this is field maple above our heads, and then hawthorn here. And the hawthorn will, once it gets to this size, they can just blow over. You can see the prickles low down here, making it, or dictating it was a former livestock hedge, well before my tenure on the farm. And there'd probably been a fence, barbed wire came in the mid-1800s, and meant that you didn't have to have growing hedges in such the same extent. But the hedges all form field boundaries, and often small farms, would have small fields, and this field behind this tall hedge that we're standing under is only about 7 acres, and the next one is 6 acres. But I've kept all the old field boundaries and these old hedges in. This side of the farm with the heavy clay didn't suffer the same fate with the bulldozers coming through. Otherwise this lovely old hedge would have long been gone in the 1970s.
And this wonderful ride, you must be so proud of this.
Yes.
It's so beautiful here, isn't it?
It's about 20 yards wide, and it goes right through to the Roman town. So in fact it's an old Roman road, and I kept it because it was the beginning of me saying sorry for my bulldozer years. And there were some birds nesting in here. Sadly, they haven't been back for the last 2 years, and they require these really tall hedges. And it's a really special bird. It's a very beautiful bird. It makes the most gorgeous sound on hot summer's days, sometimes on telephone wires, but often from the tops of these trees. And it's the turtle dove. And it's so sad that it's gone missing from... It's the fastest declining bird in the UK, declined well over 90%, and they were here in masses through my childhood. So it's my ambition to give them everything that they need to come back. Fingers crossed, one day they will do. And the fields opposite here, on the other side of this hedge, are planted with overwinter wild bird seed mix, and there's a special plant growing out there. It's put itself there naturally, and it's top-notch food for turtle doves, and it's called fumitory. And it literally means smoking ground, because the leaves are kind of a bluey, greeny colour, and it looks as though the ground's on fire, hence fumitory. And the adult birds collect the seeds, mash them up, and feed the baby turtle doves on that. And I went across to Sicily, and there was a turtle dove reserve there, and I saw perhaps 75, 80 turtle doves in the space of an hour, and all around was that lovely purring sound of the turtle doves in the heat of the day, and that brought back memories, which is why this hedge is still here. It needs a bit of attention so it doesn't all fall over, and any gaps in between, you can see there's almost 15-20 feet between one hawthorn and the field maple there, and that could be planted up. It's called gapping, where you actually add bits into old hedges.
Is that something you plan to do?
Yes, that's something I've done, and I've already started to do it back here. If we walk back a little bit, you can see there's a 20-yard gap, and I'll fill that in with new planting already, and that's getting nicely established. So you see the countryside does change hugely. You can't kind of put your elbows on the table and say, no, I'm not moving. And this organisation, FWAG, is sort of lubricating the way between the requirements of environmentalists who realise how important looking after the countryside is and the needs of food production. So it's a really difficult marriage, and everybody has to be flexible, but it can be done.
Well, thank you for telling us about FWAG.
Yes, there we are. It sounds a bit unusual name to bring in, but they'll be very pleased. And there's local FWAGs. There was a total, after that Silso conference, of nearly 70 individual FWAG groups set up all over the UK, including Scotland and Ireland and Wales. and it's sort of stabilised a bit now, and some of them have become regional, but the Norfolk FWAG is still very much in existence and open for business, and the advice you get be free as well. So, and there's usually a farmer chairman in each group, so that the interests of farming are not lost completely. But you can see this hedge, and the rewards from looking after the environment are equal, at least, to, you know, food production, because it's really worth doing.
So
And
birds, we can see the birds moving about inside this very mature hedge,
Yes.
and they flourish. And down at the base we have mice and voles.
yes, the whole habitat here, and of course you've got all the daytime birds, and then again we did a nocturnal visit here just a couple of weeks ago, and we were seeing sort of barn owls flying and all the hares and small mammals, and we're being serenaded. Well, it's the middle of February, bird song all around us. Absolutely lovely.
I think we've got some emails to look
We
at.
have. We need to get back to the truck and go through a few of the questions.
Well, thanks as always for all your messages and emails, letters, everything coming into High Ash Farm. And we read every single one of them. And we've selected a few questions that have come in for Chris to be quizzed on. You ready to be quizzed?
Just about, yes.
Julian in Halesworth says, amazing to hear about the spring flowers and fungi, which is always an interesting subject, as was the tawny owl warbling. I've got a few recordings of birds I take when out, but always find it amazing how some calls, or birdsong, throw a curveball at you, just as you think you've mastered them. I love the various sounds of nature and find it can be as important as the visual. Perhaps a podcast on the sounds of High Ash would be great one day. Well, you've got quite a library, haven't you?
I certainly have, and as we're speaking, I'm doing a podcast for children, and it's going to contain many of the bird sounds. We're going on a special hunt looking for a creature that lives here at the farm, and I'm going to be interviewing many of the birds and animals as I go around the farm, and include some of that library of sounds that I've accumulated over the decades.
Let's head to Harpenden, where Paul Baldwin is a listener to the podcast. And Paul says, I wonder if Chris could provide an ID on these lovely little birds that I've photographed. They wandered into our close yesterday. They seemed very confident and did a circuit of all 8 houses, inspecting everything, ending up on our front doorstep. We're very used to seeing pheasants and partridges along with all the other birds we feed, but we've never seen these before. And looking at the photographs there, they're very pretty patterned birds, aren't they?
Yes, they certainly are, and I knew the answer straight away. In fact, they are partridges. There are 2 main species of partridge in the United Kingdom, one of which is resident, one of which was introduced, and the resident one's called the English partridge, or the grey partridge, Perdix perdix, lovely scientific name, and that's one of those red list species. It's declined hugely since the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s, so there's just a remnant of population compared to what there was. And way back, because early sportsmen didn't think grey partridge was enough sort of sport for them, so another species was introduced. They're called French partridge, red-legged partridge, and it was way back in 1790 that the introductions happened, and they come from southern Europe and over in southeastern Europe, and they love really, really dry drought conditions, and that's why you find French partridge, red-legged partridge, whatever you like to call them, much more on the eastern side of the UK. So where we are is their home, and we have them here at the farm. They're spectacularly beautiful.
And these are French, are they? Because I can see a pinkish tinge to the legs.
Yes, they've got red legs and a red beak to go with it, sort of blood red. There's some really sort of pretty patterning on the sides of the breast, sort of lines on the feathers, and they have a white chin and a little black sort of bib under the chin which comes up through the eye, so they have a kind of black stripe through the eye and a little bit of beige on top of the head, but they don't have the lovely sort of speckled plumage that the English grey partridge would have with that liver-shaped heart. We're just past Valentine's Day and grey partridge kind of have a liver-shaped heart on their breast. They're beautiful birds. So that's what they are, and I was quite amused because one of the little photographs shows the grey partridge inspecting a little shrub at the entrance of your garden, and I think that shrub is lavender. And lavender, they love the seeds left in the seed pods from last year's flowering, and several of them are looking at that bush quite intently and look as they're going to find that. They know what it is, it's instinctive in them, and that's what you've got. They're very much game birds, French partridge, and they're easy to breed, so you can release large numbers of them and have almost exclusive partridge shoots. So there we are. That's what those are.
Yeah,
so,
thank you for the photographs there.
Brilliant.
A gang of French partridge
Yes.
wandering the streets of Harpenden.
Absolutely. When they're a gang, we don't call them a gang. In farming terms, we call them a covey. There we are, just to be correct.
Now, here's a note that's come in from, and let's just see, from Zoe Shunden, who says, I've got a patio area at the back of the garden created using sleepers by the previous owner. As I rarely use it, I've decided to convert it into a wildflower area. There's going to be a small pond at one side at the front and a rockery and log pile at the back where it is shaded by a beech tree. Could I have some advice, I think, is really the question here, isn't it?
Yes.
And also, she wants to create a pond by using an old water tank from a loft.
Yes, she does. There's a picture of the area. It's 12 feet by 8 feet, so it's quite a small area. And I've had a look at it, and there's the beech tree just creeping in over the area, so it is partly shaded. And also she's found an old water tank that she sent us a picture of here and wants to install that. So a little bit of advice. First of all, you've got a tall wooden garden fence, and the sleepers have been up against that, and I can see where the marks are down on the ground. So check your upright posts by giving a good wobble before you start to do any sort of major works, because the posts they're wooden posts and they're 6 feet, 7 feet tall. So make sure they're sound before you start anything, and then make the most of that fence. Either put some ivy in, because the fence is actually bare. You could put some mesh across there first and train the ivy up that, and or some berry-bearing plants, things like a pyracantha, if it's a north-facing one, will do well there. There's one particular variety I grow here at the farm which has bright orange berries on, and that's called Orange Glow. That's quite an interesting variety, and it will grow against that wooden wall, and it also produces lots of blossom in April and May, so that's a good one. And then for the ground area down on the deck, as it's semi-shaded, a good woodland plants to plant in, which will give you some early pollen and nectar. Unfortunately, it's a biennial, so you've got to wait until 2026 for it to come out into flower. That will be foxgloves. Digitalis purpurea is a good one, doesn't mind a shade. Perhaps some bulbs, early spring bulbs in, some native snowdrops perhaps in there, and some grasses, and then a few surprises as well. If you have nettles growing in the area, to put nettles in there, and that's the food plant for many of our species of butterflies. People will be scratching their head, why do you want to be growing nettles in your garden? Well, that's a good place to grow it. It's growing beside a fence, then the soil looks very, very fertile there, and nettles like high fertility, and then you'll be helping the next generation of butterflies. You've already provided some pollen and nectar, perhaps with the ivy on the back wall there, a native ivy, please, called Hedgerows. So it's the British native ivy, is really good, and so you've got lots of possibilities there, and it's lovely. And as for the water tank, then I wouldn't use that because it's about 2 foot deep, and it's sort of had its day. It's getting quite old, and the zinc is beginning to flake, and so you will have zinc contaminating the water. it's because it's galvanised tank, and the sides of the tank would be far too brutal for wildlife, things like frogs and toads and newts, to be able to climb out. Even if it was buried in, you'd need to kind of fill it with rocks if you did line it, so that it is all different layers. A good pond will have some deeper water in, but the main points of habitation around any pond that's created is all the shallow margins where you get the sort of muddy habitat, ideal for dragonflies and all sorts. So lots and lots of advice. So get rid of the sleepers and start off fresh like that. And it's exciting just to watch things develop when you do put these wild areas in, and you can go there on hot summer days and see different species of butterflies. So you can get some other pollen and nectar plants which are semi-shade tolerant, and but foxgloves is a winner there. So there we are, and thank you everybody for sending all these wonderful questions in. I love being challenged with all sorts of ideas.
Well, good luck, Zoe, and
Yes.
send us a photo when it's all up and running in
Absolutely.
a year or so's time.
Yeah, so thank you, and that's it. I've selected all the main questions. We do have a huge postbag these days, so we can just answer a selection of them each week, and I'll try and catch up with the backlog as we go through future podcasts.
The address is chris@countrysidepodcast.co.uk. Chris Skinner farms a square mile of countryside in the east of England near Norwich. It's called High Ash Farm, and we'll be back again for another podcast next week.
Yes, see you then.